"You're overreacting." That's what he said, again, as he stood across from me in our kitchen, arms crossed, voice cold and measured, like he was talking to a student who didn't understand the rules. "My name is Elena. I'm 34, and I work in nonprofit development, grant writing, community partnerships, always advocating for people who aren't being heard. I never thought I'd have to start doing that for myself. But here I was, staring at my husband of 8 years, realizing I hadn't been heard in a very long time. It started with small things. He'd a joke about how emotional I was, how I make things bigger than they are. I used to brush it off. Everyone teases a little, right? But lately something had shifted. He'd stopped listening altogether. And when I brought up how tense things felt between us, he'd shrug and say I was imagining it, that I was just overreacting. This time it was different. I had noticed something during our last argument. A sound, barely there, his phone buzzing on the counter, screen lit up in record mode. When I asked him directly, "Were you recording me?" he didn't even flinch. He just laughed and said, "You're being paranoid, overreacting again." I didn't cry. I didn't fight. I just looked at him, nodded, and said nothing, because this time I already knew the truth. He had recorded me, and I was going to let him hear exactly what I had found. If you've ever been told your pain was just in your head, this story is for you. Please subscribe to the channel for more stories about power, betrayal, and quiet revenge. Your support means everything. Stay tuned, one recording, one sentence. That's all it took. The first time he told me I was overreacting, it was over something small. A dinner we'd planned for weeks, he canceled last minute to meet a friend for drinks. I told him I was disappointed, that it made me feel invisible. He laughed. "You get so worked up over nothing." That phrase would become a kind of poison in our marriage, dripped slowly, harmlessly at first, until I started to doubt whether I could trust my own instincts. But let me be clear. Daniel wasn't a monster. He was charismatic, intelligent, well-liked. He volunteered at the food bank once a month. People said we were a solid couple, and from the outside, we probably looked like one. Inside our house, though, it was different. Arguments didn't end, they got repackaged. He'd apologize without meaning it. Or worse, he'd twist the issue into something I'd done. If you didn't start things in that tone, if you weren't always assuming the worst, I learned to second-guess myself, to replay conversations in my head, to edit my own tone before speaking. Because the moment I raised a concern, he'd twist it until I felt like the irrational one. One time, I asked why he didn't introduce me to a woman he'd spent 20 minutes talking to at a party. He said I was jealous, that I'd ruined the vibe by being insecure. Another time, I brought up how often he interrupted me in group conversations. He said with a one, "You just talk too much. People get tired. I'm trying to help you." It was subtle but constant. I'd tell myself, "He loves me. He's just tired. He doesn't mean it." I clung to the good days like they were proof the bad ones weren't real. But something shifted last spring. I noticed he started locking his phone, something he'd never done before. And when I walked into a room, he'd change tabs quickly or flip his screen down. Then came the argument. I was frustrated, not yelling, just tired. I told him I needed more presence from him, emotionally, mentally. He said nothing, just watched me. His phone buzzed once, but he didn't check it. I didn't think much of it until a week later when I picked up his phone to hand it to him and saw a file in his notes app titled Convo April 9th. My stomach dropped. I opened it. And there it was, an audio recording of me, talking, explaining, sounding tired, stretched, raw. My voice had that pleading tone I hated, the one I thought I'd outgrown. I felt sick. I didn't listen to the whole thing, just enough to realize what it was. My words, my emotion, cataloged without my consent. A private moment repurposed as, "What? Proof, a weapon. I didn't confront him right away. I just closed the file and handed him his phone like nothing happened. Because in that moment, a new part of me came online. Not the part that cried, not the part that explained, but the part that waited and watched. The next few days passed in strange silence. Daniel seemed lighter, almost cheerful. He whistled while making coffee, texted me memes like everything was fine, and I played along. But something inside me had shifted. I started checking, quietly. I knew his phone password, he hadn't changed that. So every time he fell asleep early or left it on the kitchen counter, I searched. I didn't know what I was looking for exactly until I found it. A folder in his cloud storage labeled for protection. Inside, 7 recordings. Each one dated, each one labeled with cold clipped summaries. March argument, blow up, Elena overreacting, April. Tone issue, dinner. My hands were shaking as I clicked through the file names. I didn't even need to listen. Just the titles were enough to make my stomach twist. He had been collecting me, archiving my emotional lows like evidence in a courtroom. Later, I found a voice memo transcribed into a Google Doc. I recognized the words. It was something I'd said during an argument in February about how I felt like I didn't matter to him anymore. He had highlighted parts in red and added a comment. Overreaction, note tone, gaslighting claim. That word, gaslighting, he'd used it before, not an apology, but as accusation. You always say I'm gaslighting you, he once snapped, but I record things because you changed the story. I remembered that moment now with a new, bitter clarity. He hadn't been trying to understand me, he was documenting me. And the worst part, he didn't even hide it that well. Because deep down, I think he didn't believe I'd ever fight back. I sat on our bed scrolling through his little archive and realized something devastating. It had never been about working things out. It had always been about control. He didn't care that I was hurt. He cared that he could prove I was being too emotional to trust, that my voice, my truth, could be edited, replayed, dismissed, and I'd let it happen. Until now, I emailed myself copies of 2 key recordings, the ones where he mocked my emotions after pretending to comfort me. I didn't know what I would do with them yet, but I knew one thing for sure. If he thought the recordings were his power, he was about to find out what it felt like to be on the other side of the play button. It was a Tuesday evening when I finally asked him, calm, collected, "Why did you record me?" Daniel looked up from his laptop, confused at first, then a flicker of something else, annoyance maybe, crossed his face. "What are you talking about?" I sat down across from him at the dining table, no raised voice, no drama. Just truth. I found the folder, the recordings, the one titled Elena Overreacting. I kept my tone neutral, like I was reading a grocery list. He sighed, not shocked, just inconvenienced. "I only started doing that because you twist things," he said flatly. "You get so emotional and then you act like I'm the bad guy. This way I have proof." I blinked slowly, proof. That was the word he chose. "So you needed proof that my feelings were real?" "No," he snapped, louder now. "Proof that I'm not crazy. You make me sound like a monster when you retell things." I didn't flinch. Did it ever occur to you that recording someone in their most vulnerable state says more about you than it does about them? He stood up, pacing now. "You're doing it again. You're turning this into a whole thing." "God, Elena, you can't just let stuff go." I tilted my head. "Let what go? That you've been secretly recording me? Cataloging my emotions like evidence?" He threw his hands up. "You're overreacting." There it was. Again. I almost laughed, but I didn't. I just looked at him. Really looked. And for the first time, I didn't feel hurt. I felt tired and done. You know what's funny? I said quietly. You've been documenting me like I'm a threat, like I'm unstable, but I've been the one giving you grace, again and again. He opened his mouth, but I stopped him. I'm not here to argue, I just wanted to hear what you'd say when you knew I knew. He looked at me, trying to gauge if I was bluffing. I've already sent 2 of the recordings to my personal email, I added. Don't worry, I'm not going public, but I needed to hear you say it, out loud. He sat back down, suddenly quiet. Maybe realizing he couldn't talk his way out this time. Maybe realizing that I had finally stopped explaining. That night, I didn't cry. I lay in bed beside him, the silence between us louder than any argument we'd ever had. He scrolled through his phone like nothing had changed, like I hadn't just confronted him with a truth so intimate and violating it should have shaken him. But it didn't, and that told me everything. I stared at the ceiling, thinking back, years of being told I was too sensitive, too dramatic, too much. I used to believe those words. I used to wonder if there was something broken in me. But now, I saw it clearly. He never wanted to understand me. He wanted to win. And I was done playing his game. The next morning, I woke up before him, made coffee like usual, went through emails like usual, but in my mind, I was rehearsing what I was going to do. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about exposing him. It was about balance. I needed to reclaim something he'd been quietly stealing from me for years. My voice, my confidence, my clarity. I replayed one of the recordings. It was one where I had said through tears, I just want to feel like I matter to you. And his voice, flat, cold, responded, You always make everything about you. It hit different now. Hearing it without the emotion, without the gaslighted fog, just the words, the raw truth. I selected a 1-minute clip from that recording and saved it separately, the part where he told me I was too unstable to be taken seriously, the part he always denied saying. And I wrote one sentence in my notes app. You told me I was overreacting, so I want you to hear it for yourself. That was it, one sentence. That night, I asked him if we could talk. He barely looked up from his screen. What now? I pulled out my phone, found the clip, pressed play. His voice filled the room. My voice cracked in the background, and that one moment, him calling me unstable, echoed louder than I expected. He froze, then he said nothing. I paused the clip halfway through, looked him in the eye, and said it quietly. You told me I was overreacting, so I want you to hear it for yourself. He didn't respond, he just stared at me, suddenly aware that I had stopped trying to be understood and started making myself undeniable. He looked stunned, paralyzed even. The phone was still in my hand, the recording paused on his voice, saying the one thing he swore he never said. The room had gone still. There was no music, no television, no movement. Just that heavy silence that follows a truth too sharp to ignore. I watched his face, not for guilt, he didn't wear guilt, but there was something else there, fear, maybe, or the realization that his version of control had finally cracked. He opened his mouth to speak, but I shook my head gently. No, I said. I'm not looking for an apology. I'm not trying to have a conversation. He blinked, confused. Then what is this? This, I replied, is closure. He sat back slowly, eyes flickering toward the phone. You don't understand what it's like to be constantly accused. I cut him off, calm and clear. Number, you don't understand what it's like to be constantly doubted. I picked up my coffee mug and stood. No shouting, no tears. Just a moment so calm it shook him more than any fight we'd ever had. Daniel, I said, you spent so long trying to capture me on tape, to prove to yourself that I was irrational, unstable, emotional, but here's what you never realized. I paused, standing just a few feet from him now. I wasn't unstable, I was exhausted, I wasn't dramatic, I was desperate to be heard. You made me feel like I needed a witness to my own life, and when I finally became my own witness, you called that manipulation." He stared at me, still quiet. "So I gave you what you wanted, a recording of you being exactly who you are when no one's watching." I took one step closer, placed my phone gently on the table between us, and spoke the sentence I'd been rehearsing for days. "You said I was overreacting, so I let you hear what it sounds like when I finally stop." And then I turned and walked away. I didn't storm off. I didn't slam doors. I left him exactly as he'd left me over and over again, staring at the space where my voice used to be. I didn't leave that night, not because I was uncertain, but because I wanted the quiet to settle. I wanted him to sit with it, with the evidence, with the sound of his own voice, unedited, uninterrupted. He barely spoke to me for the next 2 days. No apologies, no excuses, just that heavy, brittle silence between us. I think he expected me to lash out, to create some scene he could point to and say, "See? This is what I mean." But I didn't give him that. I moved through the house with a calm he didn't recognize. I cooked meals, answered work emails, folded laundry. I was present, but already gone, and that terrified him more than any shouting ever had. On the 3rd day, he asked if I wanted to talk. I said no. Not out of spite, but because I had nothing left to explain. I had spent years giving him my words, my apologies, my analysis of every fight, every feeling. I had given him chances to listen, and he used those chances to build a case against me. Now I was giving him silence. I slept in the guest room for a week, began sorting out what I needed. Documents, bank information, passwords. I wasn't rushing. This wasn't about escape. It was about re-entry into myself, my sanity, my boundaries. Eventually, he asked if I was leaving. I said yes. He asked if we could fix it. I said no, because by then I had already fixed what needed fixing, me. I moved out on a Saturday morning. There wasn't a dramatic goodbye. No tears, no shouting in the driveway. I packed my things in silence, took one last look at the apartment that had become more of a stage than a home, and closed the door behind me. A month later, I moved into a quiet condo near the lake. Small, sunlit, quiet, the kind of place where my thoughts had room to breathe. Some mornings I'd catch myself listening for the sound of tension. Footsteps down the hallway, a sigh behind a closed door, but it never came. And that's when I realized the peace I'd been begging for all those years had never been tied to him. It had only ever depended on me stepping away. I started writing again, not for work, but for myself. Journaling, capturing moments, naming things I'd ignored for too long. Gaslighting doesn't always come with slamming doors and shouted curses. Sometimes it comes softly, wrapped in logic, dressed in reason, delivered by someone who claims they're just trying to help you see things clearly. But here's what I know now. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't irrational. I was simply unheard. And that night, when I played him the recording, I wasn't looking for justice. I wasn't trying to hurt him. I was reminding myself, my voice matters, my memory is valid, and I don't need proof to believe myself anymore. That one sentence I spoke, it didn't end our marriage, it ended my silence. And that was the most powerful thing I'd done in years. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, or if you've ever questioned your reality in a relationship, please subscribe for more stories about dignity, healing, and quiet strength. Turn on notifications so you never miss a new episode.